So we finally have the news that we've been waiting for. Canon is lining up their hybrid play next month, while third-party glass is taking bold swings for some specialist workers. There are real movements on bodies and lenses worth looking at, so let's jump in. So before we get talking about Canon and the lenses and cameras that are coming, I want to talk about the fact that TT Artisan has actually renewed one of Canon's more iconic tilt-shift DNA pieces. And according to Digital Camera World, TT Artisans has released their tilt-shift 17mm f4. This is an spherical full-frame tilt-shift lens, and it's channeling some of the older Canon camera lenses like the TSE 17 f4, but in this case, in a much more affordable price. So this is a $509 ultra-wide tilt-shift that can even cover potentially digital medium format lenses. And that shifts the conversation for architecture shooters and creative specialists. So this 17mm f4 spherical supports a maximum image circle of 64mm. That's large enough to cover some digital medium format sensors. It offers 8mm of shift and 8 degrees of tilt for perspective correction and a plane of focus control, while Canon's 17mm tilt shift allowed 12mm of shift. This 8mm range is still addressing many of the real-world needs for architectural and interior shooters. Now, optically, it's built around 17 elements in 11 groups with a 10-blade diaphragm. Those are some phenomenal optical designs considering the price. That can render smooth bokeh and distinctive 10-point starbursts with a minimum focusing distance of about a foot, which opens up tight interior details and some creative close-up opportunities with extreme wide-angle options. The lens body itself is metal and includes a clicked aperture ring, ships with a dedicated hood. It also rotates 360 degrees, which lets you align the tilt and shift precisely for the verticals or the creative effects that you're specifically going for. Now, on the application side, architecture and interior photographers are able to use lenses like this to keep vertical lines straight and avoid distortion that normally comes from wide angles, while creative shooters can actually lean into the tilt function and create subject isolation for miniaturization effects. And as I mentioned, pricing on this lens is $509, with the first batches available for Sony E-mount and Fuji GF mounts, with Nikon Z, Canon RF, and L mount versions to follow. Availability is expected on TT Artisan's Amazon store, and for GFX users in particular, that combination of coverage and control and cost is pretty notable. Now, while we're here, and on a related note for Canon in 2026, there is a running wish list proposing 3 camera launches in an R7 successor, a retro-styled inspired digital body, and a compact camera update. Now, the R7 Mark II is rumored to be electronic only on the shutter side of things, with a new LCD, a 33 megapixel stacked sensor, 40 frames per second shooting with that electronic shooter, 8.5 stops of IBIS, pre-burst cache, 4K 120 in 10-bit with C-Log 3, and the potential for CF Express Type B. Now, I've seen these specs jump all over the place, and as we had with the R6 that we're going to talk about a little later in the video, some of this is reality from production, some of it is just from users kind of wanting specific things, and in some cases we have had prototype items out in the field that photographers have been using that some of that information is leaked out, but those prototypes do change, especially when we're early in the production cycle. Now, on the AE style camera, the RE1, which I talked about in a previous video, I'll link that down below. The concept is said to be a target of a 24 megapixel sensor with in-body image stabilization, a silver and chrome top, and an ASA style ISO dial, as well as a hybrid viewfinder, a mechanical mode dial, all the AE1 font trappings, and a silent leaf style E-curtain for video. Ideally, this camera would come in under $2,000 and potentially be available to be paired with a slim 28mm f2.8 pancake style lens, maybe in a similar retro feel. I love my AE1. I would love there to be a mirrorless digital version of that camera, and I would be happy to throw my old FD lenses on it. Now, on the compact side of things, we are seeing a lot of chatter about a G3X2 with a 1-inch 30 megapixel stacked sensor and a fast 1/200th readout, as well as the potential for a digic accelerator, moving that additional phase detect dual pixel AF with AI features down into the compact base. With these additions, Canon could potentially shore up both the APS-C and fixed lens travel segments alongside jumping into the retro trend. Next up, let's talk a little bit about RF primes and where we think Canon might be heading in that segment. So we have new compact RF primes on paper, and according to the photoblogger, Canon has published a number of patents, but some specific ones are these 50mm f1.2, 35-1.8, and a 65, with some additional examples pointing to a potential 70 f1.8. Now, as always, patents aren't product announcements, but the optical blueprints kind of tell you what they're exploring, and this one hints at fast, compact primes designed to focus quickly and potentially offer these focal lengths with these apertures at lower prices. Now, this patent was filed in October and outlines some back focus distances and rear focusing mechanisms to give speedy autofocus. It also notes constant physical length during focusing, and these are definitely framed as lightweight, high performance design. And there's also the reports of the 45 f1.2, which we might be getting here in November with the release of the R6 III. But again, more of that towards the second half of the video. And market context here really matters because we've got folks like Sigma, 7 Artisans, Viltrox, TT Artisans, Tamron, and others who are pushing hard into the prime space, though in many cases not available on the RF mount. And unless Canon plans to open up the mount to these third parties on the full frame side of things, they need to come out with lenses to compete both on features and price, and it looks like these might be that direction. So with patents on the prime side of things and the potential for, as the year kind of rolls out, Canon expected to fill in their VCM line with a few more primes, Canon seems to be hitting on all cylinders when it comes to lens releases, but what's been pretty well demonstrated is that they're also hitting on all cylinders when it comes to prices, as their lenses have been quite expensive and more towards the top end when it comes to full frame. The hope is that they can fill in those gaps and make themselves more competitive on the lens front if they plan to maintain that RF full frame first party dominance. All right, next let's talk about the R6 Mark III. Now, according to Canon rumors and a number of other sites that seem to be picking this information up in little bits and pieces, the Canon R6 Mark III is set to be announced on November 6th or maybe November 9th. There's some competing information there, but they claim that specs are locked in. And we're also going to be getting the new RF 45mm f1.2 STM lens right alongside. Now, I want to take you through the timing and the specs and the guidance for their full frame body. And then I want to talk a little bit more in depth about some of these specifics. So again, I mentioned that November 6th was the date that we're expecting, although again, other outlets are reporting on the 9th as the potential date, with shipping tentatively late in November. I reported on a previous video that we were expecting somewhere between the 16th and the 26th. We have multiple NDA dates that are floating between the 16th and the 26th, and that might have something more to do with early hands-on reviews from folks like the influencer crowd that would traditionally get this camera early, the Peter McKinnons and the petapixels.com, right? Jared Pullard from Frontos Photo. Those guys are probably going to be under NDA until somewhere between the 16th and the 26th. That doesn't mean that we won't necessarily get an announcement on the 6th or the 9th. And specifications are pointing pretty much in the same direction that we expected about a month or so ago as things started to solidify, with a 34.2 megapixel total and 32 megapixel effective sensor, the same sensor as the EOS C50. On the autofocus side of things, we are expecting dual pixel CMOS autofocus 2 with multiple subject detections. No mention as to whether or not that's going to be powered by the digic accelerator, although again, to be honest, if they do not include the digic accelerator alongside the digic FX processor here, I would be very surprised. Stabilization rated at 6.5 stops in body. As expected, pre-capture support and up to 40 frames per second shooting with the electronic shutter. Again, no mention of shooting with the mechanical, though we would expect that it would we continue to have a mechanical shutter, and that would probably stick at about that 12 frame per second that we expect from Canon shutters. No mention of the length of the pre-capture support, though I would expect it to be on par with what we've seen from the R3 and the R1 and the R5 Mark II. Now, as I mentioned previously, this is a change in that sensor's design as the C50 moved from a dual gain circuitry system that Canon has traditionally relied on to a dual native ISO system. And so one interesting bit of specification that we have here is that it would have a max ISO of 64,000. And that, in my mind, that almost feels like a downgrade over the current R6 Mark II, but I'm going to put that number on the screen because I know that the R6 Mark II has its expanded modes available, but honestly, off the top of my head, I can't remember if that's 51,200 or if the 102,800 is actually a base. But we would assume that the 64,000, if that's the top of the range, then we would continue to see something like either 400, 640, or 800 as one of the base ISOs for recording, and maybe 32 or 6400 as the additional base ISO as we have in the C50. Now, we're also expecting open gate recording. Now, this is a 6K plus sensor, so we don't, again, know how many of those resolution combinations we would get, like with the C50, where you're able to shoot in 7K and then either crop in later, or you can do those additional optional crops that then record separately to your SD card. Pricing is currently listed at $28.99, which is pretty much right where the R6 Mark II landed. And if you factor in some of the price increases that we've seen from Canon cameras, actually kind of fair and potentially a drop, but I think right where they need it to be to stay competitive in this prosumer enthusiast kind of entry-level full-frame tier. Now, there's also a lot of kind of image sleuthing going on right now. We've got blurry pre-release photos that are showing an EVF bump that looks like it's got an angular design, as well as a larger eye cup than what we would normally see from an APS-C body, more like a full frame body. It also has that side mode dial that we normally see with the R6 series, and a couple of other potential changes. These images are very blurry, so I don't know how much we can actually take from them. And what I can't see here in these images is whether or not that eye cup is large enough to support the eye autofocus system that we have from the R3 and the R5 Mark II and the R1. I still think that's about a 50-50 for that to be included, maybe even less now that we're starting to see specs and we haven't heard it be a part of it. And I'm also going to start downgrading my expectation that we see the Digic accelerator, even though I really hope that it's there. One other interesting addition when we take a look at these images is the fact that it looks like there's a tally light, which I think just Canon needs to put a tally light on every single one of their cameras now, considering how much they're used for video. And that's been something that we've seen on the R5 Mark II and the R1. Now, alongside the body, I just want to mention it briefly because we've talked about it a lot on the channel. We are expecting to see the RF 45mm f1.2 STM. So that is a large aperture, standard zoom prime, but paired with their stepping motor system, not their nano USM or their VCM motors, which potentially lowers the cost, the weight. It's obviously not going to be an L lens, and we don't know anything about aperture blades. We don't know anything about groups or elements or what kind of coatings we're going to be getting in here. So honestly, I'm just kind of interested to see where they position this lens, as it is expected to be under $1,000 and closer to $500 or $600. So you get a less expensive prime that is a low light beast, potentially for portraits on the budget side of things, but without image stabilization, without weather sealing, and again, without any of the more advanced focus motor systems, so we don't know how fast it will be. There's also a mention that there's the potential for it to have some semi-macro utility, though I have not seen a solid number on its minimum focusing distance and magnification, so we'll kind of have to wait for that. If anything else comes up, I will let you know. Now, for context, other rumor outlets are echoing the same specs and pretty much the same dates, with that 32 megapixel figure, 40 frame per second electronic shutter, open gate, 6.5 stops of IBIS, with Sony Alpha rumors adding some additional kind of color and detail. That the expected Sony a7 IV launch that we're also planning to see in mid-November, that I also did a video about that I will link down below, is probably going to be under just $3,000, probably $28.99, maybe $29.99, also with a 33 megapixel sensor, but potentially no open gate support, and we don't have as much information on that camera as we do on the one from Canon. Additionally, the a7 V is expected to have a similar version of the sensor out of the a7 IV, but slightly tweaked potentially for improved dynamic range, better rolling shutter, whereas the R6 Mark III is expected to have a completely new and updated sensor. So if the specs hold, then the R6 Mark III is going to be Canon's most approachable open gate, full frame body, while it is definitely going to be a phenomenal video camera, and I know that video features and specs have a tendency to really take the headlines. I'll be honest, when I look at the R6 Mark II, and I do use my R6 Mark II primarily as a video camera, I see more folks in the wedding and portrait side of things using that camera. Many wedding and event photographers that I know are just, they're double holstering R6 Mark IIs with their zoom lens and their prime lens, and that's what they're using because it has phenomenal low light. It does do great video if you need it, and it's fast. So real quick, I want to give you my thoughts on three of these things. Number one, on the autofocus side of things, again, no specific mention of the Digic accelerator chip being included in this release. Now, that is a chip that provides a significant amount of lift for the Digic X processor and allows the R cameras that have it, like the R5 Mark II and the R1, do a lot more stuff, both in the autofocus world with things like action priority and people priority, though that is borrowed from the R3. It just makes everything better. The autofocus is much better. The AI algorithms are better. It also brings a lot of that additional video computation to the table, and it does that by allowing the Digic X to do less, which is honestly pretty great. Because while the Digic X is still the heart of these cameras, the Digic accelerator provides just a lot of support, both in autofocus and processing, which allows the Digic X to honestly work a little less and potentially get less hot. We're not hearing about active cooling out of the R6 Mark III. Now, the R6 Mark II, as an advancement of both the R6 and the R5 Mark I, really didn't have overheating problems at all. So I would assume that that's going to continue with the R6 Mark III. That's definitely not the kind of territory that Canon wants to get back into. But the fact that we haven't heard about this chip being included, that it's not a significant part of the release from Canon, kind of worries me that this camera will be a little bit more of a spec bump. And I talked about this earlier in the year when we were hearing at first that it would be the 24 megapixel stacked sensor from the R3, that turned out to be prototypes that didn't make it to development. And maybe that was the plan initially, but maybe that sensor just costs too much to make. And so they're going to be using the sensor that we have in the C50, which gives a good balance between increased resolution while maintaining good low light capability, though again, it is an engineering departure from Canon for their hybrid cameras, though not necessarily for the cameras that they traditionally have on the cinema side of things like we see in the C50. And then lastly, I want to mention that we've not heard anything about the ergonomics of the camera in these leaks. So I just want to reiterate that at my last check, the understanding is that this camera is going to be coming with the same ergonomics or ergonomic DNA that's borrowed from the R5 Mark II, making it a slightly larger body, full-size HDMI port, an improved articulating screen and EVF. And again, the rumor that we had heard was that the articulating screen would be multi-variable, not just the 3-way or 5-axis variable that we have now, although that rumor originally showed up with the C50 as well, and we didn't see that. Companies like Sony making these phenomenal flip-out screens in the A1, and you have Nikon releasing the ZR at a significant discount to what this camera is going to be with a 4-inch mega bright screen. I would be really disappointed if we don't get improvements like that to this screen, if we don't get improvements to the autofocus to bring this camera more in line with where the R5 II and the R1 are, and if we don't get that Digic accelerator to offload some of that additional processing off the camera. But we'll see. Who knows? The other thing that I want to mention on the ergonomic side, on the body side of things, is we still don't know what kind of ports this thing is going to have from the media side of things. I've heard everything from dual SD to one SD, one CF Express. I think they will maintain the dual SD card slots. I do not know how they're going to do that with OpenGate. We'll see. Notably, the C50 does come with a CF Express card, and then it uses the SD card to give you those additional videos when you're shooting in multiple formats, which is a great feature, but I don't know how they're going to deliver that if we have dual SD cards. And to be quite honest, I'm kind of done with SD cards. They're expensive per gigabyte, they're flimsy compared to their CF Express equivalents, and they're slow. But that's all I have on this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support what I'm doing here, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. I've got memberships down below along with all the gear that I use. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next one. Bye.